So on November 13th, Pastor Burnett Robinson, a Seventh-day Adventist pastor from New York, was filmed preaching, where he was quoting scriptures, and this is what he said. He said, "Wives, submit to your husbands." I just read an article about a woman who called the police on her husband because her husband raped her. He's like, I don't understand that, because the Bible said, wives, your body is not your own. It belongs to your husband. I don't understand how it's illegal to rape your wives. Husbands, your wives are the best people to rape, is what he said. And then, that video got out, and the Seventh-day Adventist conference in New York told the guy that he got to resign, so he resigned. But what this pastor did was what a lot of pastors do. They take verses out of context. So the first verse he took out of context, Ephesians 5:22, wives, submit to your husbands. He failed to read the verse right before it, Ephesians 5:21, where Paul tells husbands to submit to their wives. Basically, 5:21 says, submit to each other. And then he goes on and explains what that means. He says, wives, submit to your husbands as the church submits to Christ. And husbands, love or submit to your wives. I guess he used the word love. Love your wives, rather, as Christ loved the church and died for her. So he's giving you a dynamic of love, of giving of one another, submitting to one another, becoming one, submitting to one another. It's not, wives be, a servant and a slave to your husband, the way like this guy was preaching, and a lot of Protestant preachers use to take out of context that scripture. He's actually elevating the wife to the point where the husband must be willing to die for her. So, who loves who more? Who gives more to who? The church given to Christ, or Christ given to the church? I think Christ gave the church more because Christ gave his life. So he's actually telling the husbands to give the wife more love than he's telling the wife. The word that he's using is agape. That's a sacrificial love. So he's telling them both to submit, 5:21, submit to one another. Well, how do you do it? Well, wives, you submit like the church submits to Christ. And husbands, you love your wife like Christ loved the church. So he's calling the husband to be even more sacrificial in the marriage. And then the other verse he rips out of context, 1 Corinthians 7:4, St. Paul says, wives, your bodies are not your own. He don't even got to go to a different verse. That same verse, the second part of that same verse, St. Paul says, likewise, husbands, your bodies don't belong to yourself. They belong to your wife. And the context, again, you got to read the Bible in context. Very important. The context of that whole chapter was talking about the importance of fidelity, not to commit adultery, which in that day and age was radical, which that day and age was revolutionary. For someone to say that a man's body belongs to his wife, the first part was a given, going back 2,000 years in most cultures, and even today, if you go in any Muslim country, the wife does belong to the husband. But no one 2,000 years ago said, likewise, the husband belongs to the wife. And nowhere 2,000 years ago was anybody saying not to commit adultery for men. It wasn't called adultery when men committed adultery back then. It was called men being men. Even King David, King Solomon had concubines. This was a first. This was radical, to tell men to be faithful to their wives. you know. And St. Paul goes on in other books in the Bible, in the New Testament, where he said, there's no Greek nor Jew, there's no Greek or Gentile, there's no woman or man, we're all equal in Christ. You know, feminists should thank God for Christianity. Feminists should thank God for the Catholic Church that Jesus Christ established, because this is the first time in history that any religion elevated a woman to equal status as a man. You know, and, you know, you get a lot of atheists will do the same things. They'll wrench these verses out of context, you know. And, you know, these pastors, you know, give them ammunition. You know, I had a friend once, I was telling him about Jesus. He said, man, Jesus sounds really cool. He said, if it wasn't for Christians, I'd be a Christian. It's stupid pastors like this that don't know their Bible or purposely wrench it out of context for their own purpose that keeps people away from Christianity, keeps people away from Christ. You know, I had an atheist, back in the day when I was on Facebook, I had a atheist relative, real nice guy. We got along good. We were friends, but we would debate, you know, religion and politics, of course. You know, most atheists are Marxists, liberals, Democrats. You know, just goes hand in glove, you know, those teachings. But anyhow, we one time we were debating religion, the Bible, and he said, well, the Bible condones rape. And I said, well, you're taking that verse. You know, he didn't cite the verse. I'm sure he heard it from one of his Marxist professors. He was young. He was still in college when we were debating. I'm sure he just heard that from one of his Marxist professors. He didn't even know the chapter and verse, which I knew the chapter and verse, so I quoted it back to him. I said, well, you're taking this out of context. He's like, there's no possible way you can take rape out of context and make it okay. Case closed. He didn't want to debate me no more. He literally said, I don't want to debate no more. But, of course, I kept debating. And I told him, I said, you know, this is an Old Testament. You're talking, this was written at least 5,000 years ago, where if a woman was raped, she was always considered the, you know, they would blame her, again, like they do in Muslim countries today. If a woman's raped, she's the one that's stoned. So in those times, if a woman was raped, she could never be married. No one would ever want to marry her, because in that culture, in that day and age, men would not marry a woman who was not a virgin. So if this woman was raped, she was either going to starve to death, because it's not like today when women could work. Women were dependent on their fathers and then their husbands to provide them with their needs. So that woman would either starve to death or have to become a prostitute. And so Moses gave the law in the Old Testament that if a woman is raped, that the man who raped her has to marry her. And this is what they're saying, well, that condones rape. I'm like, no, it's not condoning rape. It's telling the guy, okay, you raped her. Now you got to take care of this woman. You can't leave her desolate. And if she's married and you rape her, the penalty was death. So that's what I meant when he's taking this out of context. Nowhere in there does God say rape is good, commands us to rape, tells women submit and be raped. He's just dealing with the reality of sinful man. And you say, well, why didn't God prevent the rape? Well, because God gives us free will. The answer, it's a very simple, it's not that complicated. We have free will, you know? And would you want to live in a world where we were all robots and we didn't have free will? I don't think so. But God's given us laws to follow. I mean, if we just follow Jesus' golden rule, love your neighbor as yourself, that's all we got to do. And there would be no rape. There would be no murder. There would be no hate. You know? So Jesus can't force us to be good, but he gives us laws and rules to follow. So if a man in those days raped a woman, he was forced to marry her and take care of her for the rest of his life, not as a punishment to her, as a punishment to him, you know? So still a jacked up situation. In no way am I saying that's a good situation, but that was the most merciful thing you can do. So the woman gets raped, so you're just going to let her die of starvation because now no man will marry her. And again, you know, God is just dealing with sinful man. You know, sinful men are making these free will decisions that are evil. So, you know, when I was an evangelical for 30 years, and I had a lot of good pastors that, really knew the Bible well, very educated guys, PhDs, MDs, some really smart guys that knew the Bible well, and they would exegete each verse to get the meaning in the verse, and they would read things in context. But unfortunately, I also heard a lot of bad pastors, like this Seventh-day Adventist pastor. And, usually the worst, there's good and bad pastors and everything. Baptist, Presbyterian, Seventh-day, Assemblies of God. But I've never heard a good Seventh-day Adventist preacher. I don't want to just point them out, but their whole, every time I hear a pastor, they have a presupposition and what they believe, and then they wrench verses out of the Bible like this Seventh-day Adventist did to mean what they want it to mean. It's called it's called eisegesis. Exegesis is when you exegete each verse to pull the meaning of that verse. What does that verse really mean? Eisegesis is when you got an idea and then you wrench verses out of context like this pastor did to make it mean what you want to mean. But like I said, there was a lot of good evangelical pastors that knew how to preach, that preach exegetical. But you see the Seventh-day Adventists all the time. Their whole foundation was by a false prophet who started them, Miller. First they were called the Millerites because he predicted Christ was going to come back in 1858. And so, he had a bunch of followers. And then when Christ didn't come back, and he didn't do that by a false prophecy. He did that by wrenching verses out of context and coming up with some number system. Christ is going to return in 1858. And so when he didn't, the Millerites stopped following him and started following this false prophet, this woman, Ellen Gould White, who claimed she had all these visions, and God said Christianity was wrong for 1,500 years. We don't go right to heaven or hell. We sleep. It's soul sleep. She made up, and then she wrenched some verses out of context and said there's no such thing as hell. It's not eternal. It's just temporary, and then you're annihilated. Just, again, wrenching verses, coming up with this weird cult called the Seventh-day Adventists. And, of course, all Protestants hated the Catholic Church, so she thought it would be popular to say, the Catholic Church is the Antichrist, or the Pope is the Antichrist, Catholic Church is the whore of Babylon. Again, wrenching verses out of context. And this is how the Seventh-day Adventists started. So it's not surprising that their Seventh-day Adventist pastors are constantly wrenching verses out of context. I just heard a guy the other day sounded so convincing, trying to, wrenching verses out of context to prove the Pope is the Antichrist, where in two places St. John talks, and I believe it's in 1 John, in two different spots where he explains what the Antichrist is. He said the Antichrist will deny that Christ came in the flesh. The Antichrist will deny the Father and the Son. I mean, he gives specifics, which no pope in the history of the Catholic Church has ever done. In fact, the first 30 of the 32 popes were killed because they wouldn't deny that Christ came in the flesh. So, these guys are the worst. But like I said, not all Protestants are bad. Not all evangelicals are bad. And in fact, it's been said, weak Catholics become Protestants, and strong Protestants become Catholic. When I was a weak Catholic, I really didn't know my faith. I believed all that crap the Seventh-day Adventists said. I didn't, about the Catholic Church. I didn't become Seventh-day Adventist because I didn't believe what they said about there being no hell. It was clear Jesus talked about eternal damnation, and, it's clear in the Bible there's such place as hell, and other things Seventh-day Adventists were way off on that they couldn't convince me. But I believed all the crap about the Catholic Church being the whore of Babylon. Because I was a weak Catholic. I didn't know the Catholic faith. As I became a strong Protestant and knew my Bible well, I realized the Catholic Church is the church. We can just look at history. Just look at history, basic history. You can see Catholic Church is the church Jesus established. And I'm excited because I have some strong Protestants who became Catholics coming up. This Saturday, former Baptist Steve Ray is coming back, and he's going to talk about church history, the Bible alone doctrine, and sacred tradition. And then the following week, he'll be at my church, St. Thomas Aquinas in St. Cloud, Florida, that evening, 6 o'clock, talking about the Eucharist and the sacrifice of the Mass. And I challenge any Protestant in the area to come and listen to him. And then afterwards, tell him he's wrong and show him in the Bible where he's wrong. Or if you can't make it to Central Florida, watch this video Saturday about Bible alone and then put in the comments why he's wrong. I dare you. If you're a Protestant or evangelical watching this, non-Catholic Christian, I challenge you to watch Steve Ray Saturday morning. He's on my show. And then the following Saturday, the morning that he's going to be at our church, December 11th, I'm going to have former Anglican priest who is now Church Militant's Rome correspondent, Vatican correspondent. And I want to talk to him about his awakening as an Anglican priest and his coming home to Rome. I'm also want to get the inside scoop on what's going on at the Vatican. So that'll be very interesting. And then I'm in talks, and I'm not going to give up the name just yet because we haven't finalized anything. But a guy that I've seen on YouTube and I really love, really enthusiastic, really gifted teacher, knows the Word of God really well. Just seems like a genuinely nice guy. And he was in full-time ministry, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, as an evangelical for over 20 years. And then, like me, from reading the scriptures and looking at church history, he became a Catholic as well. That'll be a really fun talk. I think you guys will enjoy that. And I'll announce his name when we put it all together, because right now we don't have anything officially set up. I actually had a subscriber email me and tell me about him, so that was really cool. So yeah, you guys, I read all your emails. Sometimes I don't always get a chance to reply, right away, but I eventually will. So, thank you for watching, but definitely tune in Saturday. And, if you're buying or selling real estate, you know where to go. realestateforlife.org, and tell them Blue Collar Catholic sent you. God bless and stay Catholic.